here on Lundi Gras, and we have a good speaker today. Daniel Erspamer is our guest speaker. He is President and CEO of the Pelican Institute. This is a think tank that started in 2008 by Kevin Kane, who I believe was with us before his untimely death. And Kevin was instrumental in the passage of criminal justice reform in Louisiana, and that's something that Daniel will discuss along with the upcoming session and the agenda for the Pelican Institute moving forward. Daniel Erspamer.
Thank you, Jim. Well, thank you all for having me and braving the drop in Lundi Gras temperature for today. I want to start just by giving you a few numbers that we'll come back to in a minute. The first is 13,000. 3, 10,840, and 50. 13,000, 3, 10,840, and 50. We'll come back to those. First, I want to introduce myself and the Pelican Institute. Jim was kind enough to include us and to provide that kind introduction. As Jim noted, the Pelican Institute was founded in 2008 by my friend, the late, great Kevin Kane, who many of you may have interacted with or worked with on a variety of issues, but of course, his driving passion and particularly what he dedicated the last years of his life to was criminal justice reform. And of course, we saw the successful passage of those reforms after years of work and progress from all sides of the political spectrum here in 2017. But Kevin founded the Pelican Institute to be Louisiana's free market think tank. What does that mean? A free market think tank is, our job is to look at public policy questions, to examine the economic and policy conditions in the state, to make recommendations for how to bring jobs and opportunity to the state, to really grow the economy, and more than that, to make sure there are pathways for every member of our citizenry to advance their dreams and their opportunities, which sounds very fluffy, but it's true. If the government's working for us, if our state is structured well, everybody has the opportunity to succeed in whatever that may be, whether it's pursuing a career, pursuing further educational opportunities, pursuing service in the military, whatever that may be. A state that allows and affords that and really speaks to the American dream. And that's what Kevin's vision was when he founded the Pelican Institute in 2008. I was privileged to be a friend of Kevin's and his beautiful family. And when the board asked me to serve as CEO just over 2 years ago, I said yes, and we moved. We weren't living in Louisiana. We moved our family most recently from Tennessee. We spent some time in DC before that. I have 4 kids, ages 4 through 11, and the reason I said yes for us to move our family back to this state was because there was great opportunity to build on what Kevin had begun and make big change for Louisiana, to really bring freedom and free enterprise back here, and a state where all too often we talk about the fact that we're stuck where we are, that nothing will ever change, and we keep doing the same things over and over. Now, in the last 15 years before we moved our family back, I've been in the public policy world that whole time and spent my time going into states with big challenges or big opportunities to advance a free market policy agenda. Whether that was in Wisconsin or Michigan, or tax reform in North Carolina, expanding educational opportunities to kids in Colorado, eliminating the last personal income tax on the books in Tennessee. All of these were either eliminating obstacles to people pursuing their dreams or opening up new pathways and opportunities to that. And I saw the same kinds of challenge in Louisiana. And here's what we're up against, I think. It's a more difficult, perhaps, foe, but it's an entrenched status quo that spans lots of years and ideologies, and I often say no party or viewpoint has a monopoly in this state on either success or failure. We have kicked the can down the road for changes that absolutely must be made in order to do just that, to open those pathways to opportunity. And we exist at the Pelican Institute, and the strategy that we're working to advance is to break down those barriers and to engage citizens around the state to bring a new vision for jobs and opportunity for Louisiana. And that's what I want to spend a few minutes talking with you about today, and then I'll look forward to taking your questions. So let me go back to those numbers. So let's start with 13,000. 13,000, some of you may know this, this is the number of words in our state constitution that are dedicated to how states should spend its money. In the Constitution, this isn't statute, this is our Constitution. Just by comparison, the entirety of the United States Constitution, including its amendments, is about 7,500 words. 3, we spend the third most per capita of any state in the Southeast, of any of our competitors in the Southeastern United States. The state spends about a little over $6,000 per citizen to build our government. And that leads us to 10,840. This one's been in the news quite a bit recently. You probably know what this is. These are the number of people who left Louisiana from 2017 to 2018. It's the second straight year, by the way, of drop in population increase in out-migration. And of course, 50 could be a number of things, but in particular, in this case, unfortunately, it's our ranking on the U.S. News and World Report's evaluation of states, which goes into economic conditions, laws, education, everything across the board. And unfortunately, that 50 is not, is all too familiar. We've been 50th on this particular ranking a number of years in a row. And of course, it's common knowledge across our state that we just end up at the bottom of far too many lists, time and time again. So the picture here is not rosy. And I think, you know, if we poll our neighbors and friends, and I do this regularly as I speak across the state, everyone has a story. Everyone has a story of their son or their nephew or their daughter or their neighbor who has had to leave Louisiana because there wasn't a job for them, or has had to leave because they couldn't pursue the educational opportunity they desired, or because they wanted to start a new enterprise, they had a new idea, entrepreneurial, and couldn't get it done, whether it was because of the complexity of the tax code or the high burden that our occupational licensure laws place on potential entrepreneurs. We all have a story, and so do our friends and neighbors. And yet there is a prevailing attitude that nothing can be done about it. But if you can, imagine with me for a moment a state where our economy is as vibrant as the culture. We have an educated and trained workforce that every Louisianan has an opportunity to pursue his or her dreams. And state leaders are ready to embrace a bold vision that can benefit all of our fellow citizens. And that's the very agenda that the Pelican Institute has been working in particular to develop over the last 8 months. This past fall, we launched what we call a Jobs and Opportunity Agenda for Louisiana. This is our answer to how do we fix the broken status quo. And I'll tell you how it came about. I was talking with, certainly traveling across the state, talking with citizens each and every day. But in particular, this was a conversation with a lawmaker. And what this lawmaker said to me was, we're told all the time about the problems that face our state. We're told all the time about all the votes we took wrong. And we're told all the time about all of the things we're doing poorly. But so rarely does anyone bring us a solution. So rarely does anyone say, with any level of specificity, hey, did you think about this? Did you try this? And that's so important. Not that we have a monopoly on the right answers, though of course the data leads us, these are all data-based solutions, but this should be the start of a debate. We believe that we can change our state in a big way. We believe we can bring jobs and opportunity back. And so we set out to do the research, follow the data, follow the experience from other states who have had success and lay out a specific agenda for what changes needed to be made. Some of them are easy and will have support from across the spectrum. Some of them are awfully controversial. Those are debates we ought to have. So let me just briefly walk you through the components of that agenda and why they're so important. We started with budget reform. Now let me tell you, when you're launching a big policy agenda, the sexiest topic you can really think of is budget reform. So that's where we decided to start. No, the reality is so much of our state's problems and so much of what needs to be fixed is often blocked by the structure of our state budget. I mentioned earlier, we spend one of the highest amounts of money per citizen per capita of any state in the Southeast, and we get these poor outcomes, right? I think we can all agree on those two things. How we get from A to B may be where we have some disagreement. But we started with budget, and of course all of you know there's been a lot of talk about budget dedications. These are non-reviewed government spending items that just renew year to year regardless of the state's priorities and regardless of our legislative leadership. And I want to just put that in perspective, to think about your family budget. And can you imagine a world in which your family budget was set up by your crazy uncle 50 years ago, and you didn't have the opportunity to make those changes, and you only control, as our legislature does, about 11% of the money you spend. Now, can you imagine trying to make ends meet and trying to raise your family or run your household or your business for that matter in a modern world? Could you afford and adjust appropriately as technologies change, as priorities change? I think you'd have a hard time doing that, and that's one of the challenges that we face in our state is a complicated and complex structure to the way the state spends money and the power we give to our elected officials to represent us and reflect our priorities. The next, of course, is tax. And the sin really of the Louisiana system isn't so much high or low, it's complexity in the system. As you may know, just in the terms of our corporate tax structure, there are 432 pages of tax exemptions, credits, and deductions. Now we can debate back and forth. One, it's important to remember this is not government's money to begin with. This is money that belongs to the taxpayer. But imagine a state in which we had a simple, flat, fair, and predictable system of taxes on the corporate side and on the personal side. Imagine the impact, and we've actually run the numbers. I'm going to get wonky here for just a minute, and then I promise we'll pull out of that. But we have employed a process called dynamic scoring. This is an economics process that the federal government, the Congressional Budget Office, and most economists now use to evaluate the impact of a particular tax or economic policy. Unfortunately, our state currently still just uses static scoring. So it says if you change this tax rate, it doesn't take into account the different changes of behavior and other things that happen when you move a tax up or down. It just looks at what money, based on the current scenario, that money will raise. Well, we looked at our tax plan in terms of the dynamic scoring model. And what we found was that just in the first couple of years, based on the model, by just having a roughly revenue neutral plan, we're not raising taxes, we're not lowering taxes, we're just trying to fix and streamline the structure. We could create something to the effect of 2,500 new jobs just in the first couple of years and bring in more than $800 million of new investment to the state and grow the GDP substantially over the course of the next couple of years. And of course, GDP being the measure of a healthy economy. So again, trying to really get to the heart of the matter beyond the rhetoric of high or low taxes and try to address the structure of those taxes so that we can encourage more investment, bring people in, make it an easier place to live, work, and raise a family. We looked at the balance of state and local government, which has for a very long time been relatively dysfunctional in the context of how we spend our money. This is a challenging one, steeped in history and tradition, and it's going to be very difficult to unearth that. But we have to start the conversation and ask, what is the ideal structure? What should that look like? How should state and local government interact with one another? We looked at, of course, our legal and regulatory environment. I mentioned earlier occupational licensure. This has been a hot topic debated in the legislature, particularly lately. According to the Institute for Justice, Louisiana is the 6th most onerously regulated state, most licensed state in the country. Just in context, in the 1940s, 1 in 20 American citizens had a job that required them to have a license from the government to do so. Today, it's 1 in 4. We have increased, we talk about barriers to opportunity and barriers to jobs and barriers to entrepreneurship. This is a big one. And the Archbridge Institute last summer released a study directly tying the impact of licensure regulations to economic mobility. So if we really want to have a conversation about bringing people out of poverty to changing the lives of real men and women across the state, removing these barriers to licenses, removing these barriers to jobs is one of the most important things we can do. And I'll just paint this, everyone's heard the stories. We're the only state in the country to license florists. We're one of the only states in the country to license interior designers. There are all these on hair braiders, of course, have been in the news quite a bit. This is a big thing. But let me just paint a picture of how inconsistent even these laws are. If you are an EMT or want to be an EMT, the cost will run you a little over $100, and it takes about 110 hours of training to be licensed to be an EMT. If you want to be an entrepreneur and be a company that is a contractor to install alarm systems, you have to pay over $1,400, and it requires 1,800 days of education and training as a requirement to get that license. This is an important thing we have to look at, not to mention the legal environment, and that's been talked about quite a bit and will continue to be debated over the course of the coming months and years. Lawsuit abuse is driving jobs away. There's incontrovertible evidence to support that. How we attack it is an important conversation. We're not attacking the very ideas of a tort system or the very ideas of a legal environment. These are important roles. I'm married to a lawyer. I understand lawyers are an important piece of protecting property rights and protecting individuals. But we've gotten out of hand, and it's hurting real people. It's driving jobs away, and we have to turn that tide. We've talked about healthcare and Medicaid, and one of the stats, of course, we'll be debating in the coming months is the expansion of Medicaid to 400,000 able-bodied adults in this country, or excuse me, just in this state, and what impact that has on a traditional Medicaid population who is hurting to find providers and who are being stuck all too often now on waiting lists. Just in the year since Medicaid was expanded in Louisiana, more than 5,000 individuals, sadly, from the traditional Medicaid population have died on a waiting list for a procedure. We have to provide health care better. We have to do better by those who are most needy in our society and provide pathways for people to lift out of poverty and lift out of those kinds of programs to pursue their dreams and do what's best for them and their families. We talked about K-12 education, the importance, the value of making sure there's a school that fits for every child in this state. We are an all of the above believer in K-12 education, traditional public schools, public charter schools, private schools, and having the ability for parents to make the decisions that are best for their kids and having the money we're spending follow that child to the opportunity that fits them. We have to remember we spend one of the highest amounts in the region per student to educate our kids and remain one of the lowest outcomes to educational opportunity. Something is amiss in this process and we have to fix it. We've talked about infrastructure and roads to make sure that we have enough resources and are using every opportunity available to improve our state's crumbling infrastructure. As you may know, our state owns more miles of roads than almost any state, again, per capita in the country. Part of this is a program that already exists that the current administration is pursuing. We've got to expand this to give those roads back to the parishes and localities where they would otherwise belong if we were in any other state. We've got to look for private opportunities, public-private partnerships, and bring capital from the sidelines in the private market to bear on fixing some of our biggest infrastructure projects. We'll actually have our report on that just in the next couple of weeks, so we'll give you a little preview here. And then, of course, criminal justice reform. Public safety is one of the most important factors to bringing jobs and opportunity back to the state. Not only that, but we have to make sure that our criminal justice system is fair and that it actually produces results in public safety. I've often said to audiences around the state, look, if put somebody in jail and throw away the key, we're actually doing a good job of keeping our state safe. That should be on the table, but it's not. We have this status quo that is now changing, with spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year to see almost no impact on public safety, and in the process ruining the lives and putting up, again, barriers to opportunity for folks who are re-entering our society, which only leads to more crime and a decrease in public safety. The reforms that passed in 2017 will focus taxpayer dollars on those most at risk, that will clear away barriers to re-entry. You have to remember, 95% of every person who walks into a jail to be incarcerated will come back out. What are we doing to make sure these individuals are prepared and ready and have the ability to re-enter society? We'll be addressing, again, in the context of occupational licensure, to make sure there are clear pathways for formerly incarcerated citizens returning to society who have the opportunity to get a job and provide for their families. As you may know, the criminal justice reforms are a great model for how we can fix the state. They brought people from the left, from the right, from the business community, to the faith community, to Republicans and Democrats and everybody in between, law enforcement and the legal community, all at the table to craft a solution that will improve our state. And it's important to look, it's too early, I'll be the first to say, to declare success or failure in the reforms that passed in 2017. What we do know is the data available so far, and this is important, we must come back to the data. The data available so far suggests recidivism rates are trending lower, crime rates are trending lower, and we'll watch and watchdog these reforms and make sure they're implemented well and make sure we're tracking the information well so that we can make any adjustments necessary and so that we can know, did they really work, are they really working for our citizens? These are critical questions we have to answer, but it's a model for how we change the state. It's about making the case. It's about following the data and bringing people together around an idea of change. As you can imagine, sitting around the table with organizations with whom we often go toe-to-toe on other issues, but all knowing we want the same thing for our state. We wanted the same thing and still do on criminal justice policy. We can do that. We can come together on these other issues and find pathways to bring jobs and opportunity back. So how do we do it? Again, step one, as I mentioned, is follow the data. The Pelican Institute is active in producing high-quality research laying out specific recommendations based on fact, evidence, and experience in neighboring states and sometimes other countries. For example, in our forthcoming transportation infrastructure report, we'll see some examples of Australia and other countries who have done this well with models that we can employ here in Louisiana. Again, we'll model that success. Now, we can't just import something that worked in Texas or Tennessee or Florida directly. We have to make sure it fits our unique culture and our unique state. But that doesn't mean we can't try to do those same things and implement the same fundamental principles that have made these policies work in other states. The next thing we have to do is go sell it. We have to persuade citizens across the state that these policies and these ideas are in their interests and can work for them and their families. And then finally, a long-term focus. What I think sets the Pelican Institute apart and what we focus mostly on is knowing that, the problems we're in didn't happen overnight and the solutions won't either. We often lurch from one legislative session to another or one political cycle to the next. That doesn't mean those aren't important, but until we take a generational viewpoint or at least a decades-long viewpoint of the changes that need to be made, we'll struggle to find our way. We'll struggle to find our path, and the net result is, I think, what we've seen today. Band-aids placed on a problem with good intentions intended to make things better, that all too often make things worse and make us worse off. So we'll try to address that by passing that vision for the long term and working with leaders and community leaders and lawmakers and opinion leaders from all walks of life, from all corners of the state, to come together to build consensus for big ideas that can make a difference. And so just in closing, and again, I'm happy to look forward to answering your questions, it's going to take that vision. It's going to take some patience, and it's going to take everyone coming to the table in a big way to make the changes necessary for our state. And I hope the outline of a jobs and opportunity agenda for Louisiana from the Pelican Institute is the start, or at least advances, major debate, that everyone can come to the table to engage. Bring your ideas. Let's debate them. Let's put the information on the table and make change for our state that can bring jobs and opportunity back for our families. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
I have two questions. One of them, today, 74 years ago, I was born in Homs, Syria. 55 years ago, I came to Niger Stadium. We have a lot of foreigners in Syria who would love to come here and become, repeat my story. So have you, in Louisiana, we have a lot of Syrians that live for 200 years. They've been coming here. So have you investigated? And the second question is easier than the first one. What does EMT stand for?
Oh, yes, okay. So let me take the first one. The question...
Tell me the EMT.
Oh, sure. I'm going to repeat the question so the folks watching can hear you. The first question, or the second question was, what does EMT stand for? That's your ambulance workers and emergency medical technicians that come to treat you when you have a medical condition. Thank you for asking that question. The first question the gentleman asked, he's come here from Syria and had questions about I think immigration and the policies. Look, these are really important questions to ask. And it's something we're certainly continue to look at and ask questions. There are lots of other leaders who are asking these questions. We have stayed pretty focused on state-level policy that can bring jobs and opportunity back, but I think it's an important discussion, and maybe we can talk some more after the presentation. I'd love to hear more of your story.
Because economic development.
Right. Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
Talk a little about how we need to take some measures to make the state a little bit more business friendly and attracting businesses. How do you believe the state should handle the issue with ICAP right now as far as the request for the tax incentives?
Sure.
Basically, especially after what happened.
So the question is about ITEP. How should the state handle the industrial tax exemption program? You know, it's been in the news quite a bit, a lot lately, and to me, ITEP is an example of the problem. It is, if you imagine a world in which we have a tax system, both on the property tax and corporate income tax side, that is low, flat, simple, and predictable, then you wouldn't need programs like ITEP, right? I think ITEP is a good faith opportunity, or a good faith solution from many in the business community to address what is a complex and burdensome tax structure if you're trying to start any enterprise, whether it's a family enterprise or something else. So our answer to that is it's going to take more than just a conversation around a specific piece of it like ITEP. It is an example of the need for fundamentally reforming the tax structure to provide that simplicity and predictability in the structure. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I have two questions. The first one, you talked about tax reform that was revenue neutral, and then you talked about investing in infrastructure. So if we don't raise the money for the infrastructure with a revenue system, are you going to cut something, or where are you going to get the money for the infrastructure?
So the question was, I talked about having a roughly revenue neutral tax reform package, but there are clear signs that we need more money for our state's infrastructure. How does that square? Did I get your question roughly right? So the answer to that question is to look at private capital. And so if you look at the amount of money that is available in the Transportation Trust Fund, and you look at how other states have addressed the question of infrastructure, the answer is public-private partnerships, where the state ends up having to only put up 20 or 30% at most of the total project. Private capital comes in to fund the rest, and you end up with a system of user fees rather than taxes. And so if we look, interesting fact, many of you may know, the original plan for the Eisenhower interstate system was to use tolling and user fees in order to generate the funds rather than a gas tax. Because even at that time, the gas tax was a relatively inefficient way to generate funds for road systems. The reason they didn't was at that time it was too expensive to collect the tolls. That was the fundamental answer. That has changed. Technology has made it incredibly inexpensive to collect those tolls. And with the great changes in vehicle efficiency, with more electric and hybrid cars on the roads, we just believe tolling and private infrastructure is a much better way to address the infrastructure issue than raising a gas tax and casting an equal burden on all citizens rather than those who are using the fees. One last point I'll make on that is the gas tax is also pretty regressive. If you think about the individuals who are paying gas tax but rarely using state roads, they're paying for a system that they never use and can least afford to pay those additional fees. So we would agree there is more capital necessary to attack the infrastructure issue, but it shouldn't and would be ill-served to come from a gas tax.
My other question, when you talk about the out-migration of the state, have y'all ever looked at the way that the state undervalues skills and training of workers, and how many people actually leave because the wages are so much higher in other states? They're simply leaving because their value in another state with higher wages.
So the question is, have we looked at, given the out-migration of Louisiana, have we looked at the fact that we often, make sure I don't put words in your mouth, don't prepare a workforce to have the skills and training they may need?
No, they have the skills and training. They're most productive in the United States. We don't value them here and pay them a wage that's competitive to what they can make in other states at that skill level.
Okay, sorry. So the question is, have we looked at the fact that they're going to other states to make higher wages?
Yes.
Absolutely. That is the fundamental question of a free market economy. We believe high-skilled workers should have the opportunity to pursue high-wage jobs, and we are in a more mobile economy than we've ever been in, and it will just continue to be that way. For Louisiana and our jobs to stay competitive with wages, to stay competitive with opportunity, requires fundamental changes to the system in which our families and businesses operate. And that will lead to higher wages and higher opportunities for workers across the board. Working families are the core question. We shouldn't be asking questions about necessarily business. It's how do we construct a system that allows working families to make enough money and to have a good enough job to pursue those dreams and opportunities. So absolutely, I think that's the fundamental premise that we're aimed at, and we believe those solutions and the data suggest that that's the outcome of the solutions that we promote. Thank you.
So you
Yes, ma'am.
suggested that we have unusual licensing in Louisiana. So give me 3 examples of licenses you think should be eliminated in Georgia.
Sure.
What's the question?
The question was, I've talked about the burden of occupational licenses, and she's asking for me to name 3 that ought to be eliminated. Should I do a Rick Perry moment to name 2? Yeah, that's right. No, there are some that are very easy, right? Just as an example, there are only 23 occupations that are licensed in all 50 states. So we have to ask the question, if it's licensed in Louisiana but not in Texas or Tennessee, are we somehow less safe than our neighbors in other states? So I'd give you the easy ones first, which is florists, interior designers, hair braiders, alarm installers. I mentioned that in an example earlier. These are all occupations that are licensed in, I think, fewer than 10 states. And I think we can argue we're not any safer here because our florists are licensed than they are somewhere else.
Okay, so you're specific on some small items in the big scheme of things. let's talk about K-12 education. We have a minimum foundation formula. Do you think that should be scrapped?
The question is, should the minimum foundation, school funding formula be scrapped? Scrapped is an awfully aggressive word. I think there are changes that should be considered. We believe that if we're going to spend money to educate a child, that money should have the opportunity to follow that child to whatever school fits them best. And that can take the form of a number of different things. Like I said, charter schools. We've done some good work that needs to be expanded on course access. We've done so that allows students to be able to, let's say you're in a rural parish that doesn't have an AP calculus. You should be able to have the opportunity to take that. Or a shop class. So all of those things are tied up in the way we fund our schools to be able to have reforms where the money, significant money that we're spending on our kids are able to follow to pursue that school that fits them.
So a piece of legislation, or would you be backing something in this upcoming session?
The question is, will we be backing legislation in this upcoming session? The truth is, I'm not sure much big is going to get done in this upcoming session. We're going to review all of the bills, obviously, that are filed this year and support those, or provide education and support on those that advance a free market agenda, and obviously oppose ones that don't. We don't have something on education in this legislative session that we're particularly championing.
So you said, I think you said something about that with public-private partnerships, you could have the state cost for the construction will be something like 20 to 30%, something like that. So there was, DOTD said something a while back, talking about the new bridge crossing the Mississippi River, saying that tolls would at best pay for about 25% of that bridge. Is there something that they're leaving out there? What are they missing that's
Sure.
between their 75% and 30%?
Thanks, Dave. So the question is about tolls and public-private partnerships, and the state DOTD recently saying tolls for a new Mississippi River bridge might cover 25%. I haven't heard that specifically, but I can address the question more broadly, which is we have to look at these things holistically, and I'll give you an example. If any of you have been to the Washington, D.C. area recently and driven on the Beltway, Interstate 495 that goes around, they've added something called hot lanes. This is high occupancy toll. And so the idea is these lanes are always moving. The amount of the toll varies based on volume of traffic. If you have high occupancy, you can still use it for free. I think it's 3 on the Beltway. But if you're 1 or 2 in the car, then you pay the toll or choose to pay the toll or not based on the volume of traffic. So if we look at similar kinds of solutions, it's not just necessarily the tolls that are going on that particular bridge, but you look at an area and a system as a whole. And again, we're talking about bringing private investment into the system. And this is work now, and we can look at Houston, we can look at Florida, we can look at a number of other states where big infrastructure projects like that are funded with public-private partnerships, and then the toll, the sort of holistic system in the area is used to pay for the whole slate of upgrades and increases.
So in other words, the toll on that bridge wouldn't necessarily just be that bridge.
It would be paid all of that same area, and again, I'm not a tolling expert, but the process is you want to bring capital in, and so you might might fund the whole project in an area rather than just one bridge or just one road. Yes, sir.
You mentioned our unique culture, our unique state, something I hear constantly. To what extent do you think our unique culture, our unique state are the enemy of change?
So the question is, we talk a lot about the the uniqueness of our culture and the uniqueness of our state. To what extent is that an enemy of change? I do think there's something to that point. And it's a piece of our culture that often shrugs and says, we're 50th, it's just the way it's always been, it's the way it always will be. I think that is changing. Particularly, again, we're in a more mobile workforce, a mobile economy, and a more holistic view that people have of the country and the world as a whole. And as people, especially young voters and young people coming up in the workforce, they see very quickly what their friends in Tennessee and Florida and Texas and other more prosperous states are experiencing. And I think those parts of the culture are starting to change, and that's where the demand for new ideas and a new vision comes from. But I think the fundamental force against which we have to fight is that status quo that is so deeply ingrained in our politics, in our laws, and in our political culture. And certainly to get to the kinds of change we're talking about is really a movement of the political culture, and to persuade and engage the hearts and minds of people around the state that change is absolutely necessary. But I think you make an excellent point. Yes, sir. Back there.
All right. You mentioned previously not pushing forth a really heavy agenda for this upcoming session, and you're not the first to have said that has come before the press club. A few weeks ago, Lobby President Stephen Waguespack expressed extreme optimism over the prospects for the new legislature as a result of term limits and a potential 60-65% turnover. Do you share that optimism? And if the initiatives are successful in that regard, do you think, how will you, I don't know how to phrase this, if the incumbent governor is reelected, do you see that as being a potential inhibitance, even if there is success in gaining the legislators that are sought to?
Okay, great, thank you. So the question is, there was Stephen Waguespack, the lobby president, expressed optimism that a new legislature would bring new opportunities for some agenda items like this, and what impact might that be if Governor Edwards is reelected?
Yeah.
I share Stephen's optimism of the slate of candidates who have come forth to run, and I'll tell you that's from meeting with people on both sides of the aisle. It's certainly not just one ideology. I had coffee just last week with a great guy who's far to the left, certainly of my point of view, and but shares an optimism and a desire to get something done and that to address those problems head on. And so I'm very encouraged by the candidates we're meeting and who are reaching out to ask for these solutions and for more information about how to turn the state around. And I think, to the question of who's elected or who's not, the fundamental question is on what issues are the election held. And part of that's why it's so important that we educate and engage citizens from every corner of the state in presenting ideas, again, from all sides of the spectrum. And that's why we'll be engaging very deeply this year in bringing our agenda to people's doorsteps. And we will spend over 6 figures this year in advertising and communicating directly to citizens around the state to bring these ideas forward. And it's important, and I know others are doing the same or more on all ends. And so the question is on what issues are the election held, and I think that will define what the outcomes of the next administration or legislative session will be, regardless of who's elected. And so, my plea to citizens when I talk around the state is ask these questions. Ask candidates where they stand. Are you for a broken status quo that has left us the worst economy in the country? Or are you for a new vision for Louisiana that can bring jobs and opportunity back? And if so, what is that? What do you believe? We have to move our elections and our political conversation and our policy conversation beyond the talking points and traditional issues that we've often debated and into fundamental questions of what is the vision for our state moving forward? How can you do that? And what do you believe in? That's how we'll turn the tide at the end of the day. And so, yes, I'm terribly optimistic about the future. I wouldn't be up here doing this. Thank you for the question.
Because this is a press conference, and because we need to have some paper, some reports, something to have in our hands and tear and underline. What did you bring? Anything?
The question is, did I bring any paper with me? I have one copy of our broad jobs and opportunity agenda.
I'll take it.
I'd be happy to give it to you. And if anybody else would like further copies, please come see me. I'm happy. Whether your pleasure is paper or pixels, I'm happy to oblige. You can also, of course, find all of this on our website, pelicaninstitute.org, and you can find recommendations on all of these issues. I'm getting the high sign. I think this is, I'll come get you afterwards. This is, I think, at the end of our time, and thank you so much for having me.